6, 1927, Bertrand Russell delivered his seminal lecture, Why I Am Not a Christian, to the National Secular Society in London. Does this actually stand up to scrutiny and analysis? And the answer is no, it really doesn't. All of his arguments, for instance, like the first cause argument, the argument from design, the moral argument, the character of Christ, and the moral problem, they all are fallacious. And that sounds really frustrating, but let me give you an example. In his first cause argument, he says we can destroy the first cause argument by asking the question, what made or caused God? Here's a problem. Russell, who is emphatic about the importance of language and words, doesn't actually address the definition of God, which would be a maximally great being. A maximally great being would therefore be uncaused. He's referencing Leibniz's argument, contingency argument, where premise 1 says everything has an explanation of its existence, whether that's the necessity of its nature or in its coming into existence, which would be contingency. Russell doesn't see God as being existing by the necessity of his own nature, but rather as being something that could be caused. But that ignores the definition of God as a maximally great being. That doesn't mean that God exists, mind you. It just means he's ignoring the definition. This goes on throughout the natural law argument. He asks a question and assumes that a question is an argument, which it isn't. Then he goes to the argument of design, and his argument against the argument of design is, I don't see it, moving on. Then it gets to the moral argument, which he addresses the Euthyphro dilemma, and he even gives the answer. He says, the church says God is good, but here's the problem. There's evil, and that stumps the church. No, it doesn't. In fact, Christianity says that God made people free and moral agents to choose good or evil. So why is there evil in the world? Because we chose it, not because God created it. So again, he misses the argument. Then it goes to the argument for remedying injustice, but he doesn't really address it. He goes to the genetic fallacy and says that the reason the people are Christians or believe whatever they believe is because that's how they were raised. Well, that has nothing to do with whether or not something is true, even though that is his argument for why he's not a Christian, because he goes against it. But if that's the case, then that means the only reason he's an atheist is because that's how he was raised. And the only reason that people are agnostic is because that's how they were raised. And that's clearly not true. We see people retaliating and rebelling and going against their upbringing all the time. Then he has problems with whether or not Jesus actually existed. And he says, historically, it's really doubtful. Once again, not true. Historically, the existence of Jesus is one of the most verified facts in ancient antiquity. What that means and how people interpret that fact is where the problem really lies. Then he gets into the moral argument. He doesn't like the existence of hell, therefore he's not a Christian. But once again, don't you notice how that's a fallacy of personal incredulity? I don't like it, therefore I'm not going to believe it, and it's not true. Misses the point completely of the moral problem of hell, which again, the church has an answer for. Then he gives an example of how the churches have retarded progress. And he gives the example of a virgin girl who marries a man with syphilis, and the Catholic Church says, well, you got to either abstain and you can't use birth control. Here's the problem. That's just the Catholic Church. There's other explanations from Protestants and Orthodox Christians that would say, no, you can have sex. And he's ignoring medical treatment, modern day medical treatment, if you will, for curing syphilis. And even in the use of birth control, that is strictly a Catholic thing and isn't always adhered to. So his argument that progress has to be anti-religious or anti-church falls completely flat. At the end, he says, science has the answer and we need to stand on our own 2 feet to address the world. And guess what? Christianity and God are not the answers, and we cannot use them as crutches for explaining how things are. Well, Russell, you're making a lot of assumptions. And unfortunately, all of your arguments tend to be fallacious, primarily personal incredulity or a misrepresentation of the actual arguments. Now, to be fair, he is making this lecture at a society that largely agrees with him. So it reads like an echo chamber piece where he knows that people are going to believe and agree with him. So I think you should read this. I think Christians should read this, not only this essay, but all of his essays in regards to religion and Christianity. For a logician and a mathematician of such high caliber, it's really frustrating and embarrassing how fallacious Russell's arguments against the existence of God really are. I'm Taylor Drake, Director of 412 Ministries. Happy reading.